Okay, let's go ahead and get moving. Welcome to our monthly Lamplight lunch. My name is Brittany or Smash, depending on where you know me from and what you want to call me. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Congregational Engagement Manager at the Night Ministry. And we've been having these educational conversations once a month to highlight some topics that intersect with our work at the Night Ministry. And it's been really great because we get to learn about the things that impact our clients and our work. And we also really get to highlight, I think, some of the really cool things being done by our partners. So today we are really excited to talk about employment for young folks who are experiencing homelessness. This is really important to us in all of our youth programs. And we are delighted and excited to have Carl Wiley with us from the Lyte Collective. So welcome, Carl. Welcome, everyone else. I'm going to have Carl introduce himself. And if everyone else, if you want to say who you are in the chat, that would be really awesome. And then maybe at the end, when we go into like a question and answer time, we can get to know y'all a bit more as well. But Carl, welcome. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again for having me. My name is Carl Wiley. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the Lyte Collective. So we are I'm sure, a lot of folks, I think there's a lot of overlap between our programs, and we've known Night Ministry for a while, so you guys might be familiar with us, but we support youth facing homelessness here in the city of Chicago. So I'll definitely talk more about what we're doing and our employment efforts a little bit later.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. I'd love to hear, to start with, a little bit more about what it is that you do at the Lyte Collective. And I know some exciting things are happening in your midst right now. So tell us what's going on with y'all.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for Lyte. We've been working towards opening our doors on our support center for a really long time. My colleague Dre is also in the session too, so I'm sure she could also share my excitement of how close we are to opening. But a little bit about sort of me and my background. I've been sort of working in this field for about 12 years. Prior to my time with Lyte Collective, I was also at Heartland Alliance at Neon Street in the Transition Living program before that was closed and I think reopened again. I worked at Teen Living Programs, or formerly Teen Living Programs, now Ignite. And then I also went back to Heartland Alliance and worked on the National Center on Employment and Homelessness. And that was a project around trying to find just the most innovative ways to connect employment services and homeless services around the country. So I was working with 5 cities on innovative ways to connect WEO and HUD services together. And I've taken a lot of those lessons of what I picked up from those communities and tried to apply them to at least Lyte and whatever I can do locally here in our work. So as I mentioned, we've been sort of trying to open our doors for a minute. It's been a while. We started back in around 2014 is when we first started having these really strong conversations around, we want to do something a little different. We want to open a new youth project. We'd all had extensive experience in the field, and we're building on what we knew worked and what didn't work, and trying to say, let's just do that. Let's have that happen. We don't care how long it takes. We'll just work towards it. And so that happened in 2014-ish. We then built up a really diverse board of some incredible people. A lot of our founders from the beginning now sit on our board. These are folks from business backgrounds, a ton of folks from the social service field here in Chicago, folks with lived experience who have gone through youth programs who are now wanting to share their expertise in unique ways. So that was really, I think, a cool moment for us, is building up this diverse board of people. And then in 2017 is when we purchased our space. So it's a 13,000 square foot space on the south side of Chicago, just off of 76th and St. Lawrence. So in the 6th ward. And yeah, we got this gorgeous building. The bones were fantastic. We just had to raise a ton of money to make it, bring it up to code and ADA certifications, and bring it into the 21st century, because it was an old building. And so it took us about a couple years to raise the funds for that. We needed 1.7 million. We raised about 1.2. And then we had to do a loan to bridge the gap in between those things. But the process to get to that point was essential, because we needed a space that could do all the things we wanted it to do and all the things we knew were important. So in that space, when we open up very shortly, we will have the ability to do all of the sort of traditional wraparound services that you'd expect from a youth support program, things like employment services, helping youth connect to jobs, we'll talk about a little bit later. Housing assistance, getting youth connected to the coordinated entry system and finding out the best supportive housing that we can get youth into. Addition to that, we actually opened up our own housing project so we can get youth into that when spaces are available, and I'll talk about that later too. Counseling, education services, family support services. We're gonna have meals on site, which I'm very excited about, a full teaching kitchen where we can, get some really good meals going, show people some cooking skills, storage on site, showers. I mean, really, what you can expect. One of the things that we really wanted to prioritize from the jump was creative services, things that are like really that like fun stuff that youth really like, that when budgets get really tight, it's like the first thing to go. It's all the stuff that that youth are asking for, but it doesn't keep the lights on. It doesn't keep the people paid. So it's tough. Those things tend to go first. We want to put that up front and center. So in our space, we've got places to do painting. We have a full classroom. We can do painting and drawing in there. We've got a recording studio that we're building, which I'm super excited about. That's something that I've been passionate about outside of social services, is just playing and recording music. So offering that to youth is gonna be really exciting. We've got a full gym. We can do all sorts of cool stuff in the gym with a stage. Dre, who's on here, is trained in trauma-informed yoga. We've got all these really cool things in place to do some fun stuff. We're doing landscaping tomorrow to do some of the property, and we're putting in raised plant beds so we can do some gardening. I love gardening. Also, our neighbor, his name is Mr. Davis. He lives right across the street, and he's retired now. He he's like the captain of the block, is what everyone calls him. He's like super embedded in the community, and he loves gardening too. So he's very stoked to come out tomorrow and help us do some landscaping and planting. So that's sort of the stuff that we're going to offer in-house. Beyond that, we also, at the beginning of the pandemic, so this is March of last year, we launched our Lighthouse apartments. And these are scattered site transitional apartments for youth. If the young people are single adults or single youth, then we tend to match them with roommates, and we do some due diligence to make sure that like they'll get along and everything will be good. And then if they're youth-led families, we place the whole family together. And so I believe we have 8 units, and that's funded through the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. So basically, if youth have experienced trauma, which I know from all of us here, we know that youth have experienced a wide range of trauma, they basically qualify for that housing. So we're lucky to be able to provide that. We have Erica Avant is one of our newer staff members, and she oversees that project, and she's incredible at the stuff that she's been doing. So that's sort of us in a very huge nutshell. It's not as short as I anticipated, but that's sort of what we got working right now and the stuff that we're doing at Lyte.
That's really exciting. I'm super excited to hear about how things go once y'all get your space open, and hope that we can continue to figure out ways to partner with y'all. And I think some of us would love just to come see it when you open up, because
Absolutely.
I know y'all have been working at it for a long time, and kind of the renderings I've seen from it are super cool. So really, really excited for y'all. We're gonna focus in on today on employment, realizing that is a really important topic, and especially as we are hopefully transitioning away from a pandemic, we shall see. Employment is a huge issue all around for all folks, especially folks experiencing homelessness, and particularly for young folks experiencing homelessness. So I was wondering, Carl, if you could tell us a little bit about why securing meaningful employment and well-paying work is really important for these young folks who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah. I mean, employment is, at least in my view, it's one of the most important things we can connect youth to in our housing services. One of the things that I picked up in the work that I mentioned previously when I was at Heartland around the country was that, the focus on employment services for folks in the homeless sector is like one of the most predictive factors of exiting homelessness is a quality job or income, right? Whether that be benefits that people are entitled to, but just some income makeup where folks can maintain the housing that they've got. So in my mind, like housing stability is directly tied to your income. And So the quicker we can get someone connected to a job they enjoy, I think the better. Something, and I can share this too afterward, but when I was at Heartland, we worked on a number of toolkits specifically around supporting young people in homeless services to connect to employers. So there's a whole toolkit of, it's like getting a little old now. I think it was from 2015. So, before a lot of crazy things happen in the world. But there's a lot of useful principles in there that still, I think, apply. And I think about those things all the time. So I can send an email afterward to you, Brittany, if you want, and, of all the stuff that I'll mention, but that's particularly helpful. Additionally, there's a toolkit in there around engaging employers. That's also, I think, super important. It's just having a meaningful relationship with employers and keeping that door open for folks. But I think some of the real importance around helping youth connect to employment is just around, it absolutely increases housing stability. The more young people can build that income, the more they can have a stable place to stay. There's a lot of research around youth who've connected to successful employment, that sort of predicting future career and increased income. So the more youth can connect to quality jobs soon, the better that is predictive of a longer term career of successful employment. So the more we can connect youth, sort of the better down the road. I think I've also seen this firsthand, and a lot of the research in that toolkit also says this, but for a lot of young people, that income is super important to like the familial income. So the income that youth have is really supporting like the whole family. We found in that research that youth in transitional jobs were earning about 70% of the entire household income. And that was just the young people being employed. So that was no small sector of their income, was just coming from youth who were employed in the household. And at my time at Heartland, we found that about 60% of all the youth that we'd surveyed, is about 1,000 youth, 60% of those youth were the sole earners of their household. So, connecting youth to employment is not just important, I think, for the young people themselves and all of the cool, like extra income stuff, the stuff that's not just about the paycheck that you get from being in a job, but it also supports the family directly. And a lot of youth are using that income to support their family. So I think that's super important. I think one of the things that I've seen around the importance of youth employment is helping to sort of reduce connection to the justice system. A lot of young people who are engaged in employment, there's a number of studies that back this up too, that you see fewer justice involvements for young people that are connected to quality jobs. And I think that comes down to our practical knowledge that, like, anyone who's worked with youth that have been gang involved knows that a lot of that, the pressure comes from economic pressures, not necessarily youth that are running around trying to, just do things that are troublesome, but it's a lot of times it's the only way to make money. And so youth are doing things that are illegal to make money. If you're able to offer a quality job to young people, they may just choose to do that, right? They want something that they won't get arrested for doing, that they won't have violence perpetuated upon them to do. So I think that's the strong reason of why connecting youth to employment is important. And also just like the health and the well-being of a person. There's a lot that comes from, especially, if you like your job, I guess, if you like your job and getting up every day, going to work, feeling like you're good at something is really important. That building up that self-efficacy of like, I'm good at this thing, I can do this thing, is really important, I think, for youth to build that mastery of their skills. So yeah, I think there's a whole litany of reasons why work is so important for youth. But it goes, from the income and then beyond the income. I think there's like really good reasons to do that.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that was really helpful. I think we all kind of initially think of like, oh, well, obviously they need money to survive. But I think thinking about the family and kind of the other skill set is really important as well. What are the biggest barriers that young folks face, particularly young folks experiencing homelessness, when they are attempting to either find or keep employment?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure everybody on this call is like well familiar with a lot of the barriers that exist. A lot of the same things that we experience in helping you just get stably housed are the same things that impact someone's employment stability. I think, housing instability is a really tough thing for youth that are already working. If they're going to work and they're clocking out and then they have no stable place to go, I think that can be just so traumatic and tiresome and increases burnout for youth. I mean, if you're just clocking out, riding the train all night, going back to work, that's a really tough situation to be in. And it's not a tenable one, right? It won't last forever. It's as long as you can sort of, grit it out and get through it. So helping someone connect to stable housing is really paramount to helping them keep a job, right? The other thing I think that I've heard a lot is transportation is really tough. Especially in the beginning when young people get new jobs and they're like, okay, I got to go to this job, but I have no money to get to the job. There's that like gap. So helping youth with that, we offer venture cards. And so we can help people, like we can load venture cards for youth to get to and from their jobs, which is super helpful in that, helping youth get to those spaces. But beyond that too, I think, oh, sorry, my alarm is going off. But also beyond that, I think even just having a conversation around transportation and like what is a doable commute for a young person. That's something that I've seen a lot. And I'm sure you guys have seen that too. It's like, for a young person who might live down in Dalton, like really far south, and they get a job at O'Hare, are they going to do that 2-hour bus ride every day? That's a lot, that's a really tough thing. And they may be gung-ho at first, but I think really trying to spell out what that means like a month in, and you're gonna be really tired and it's gonna eat up so much of your social time. I think having a full conversation around transportation is important too. Another barrier that I thought was, and it's somewhat now I think alleviated, but was the scheduling predictability. I think, a ton of, I would hear all the time that youth were like, I'm on schedule, like today, I got to drop everything and go to work, or I got to find childcare immediately, or, just that unpredictability of schedules was tough. Luckily, there was that ordinance passed. I think it was at the beginning of this year around the scheduling predictability ordinance. So now employers are supposed to give 10 days notice of schedule changes. I think a lot of employers still need to be educated on that ordinance, which is tough for youth to be put in that position to be like, well, actually, you can't change my schedule that quick. But that was always a really tough one, I think, for youth just to have to be able to drop everything and go to work was really tough. And childcare on top of that, I think was very difficult. It's like a longstanding problem for, and I'm sure, you guys see this too, that it's very difficult. Childcare is very expensive, or it's difficult to get. I've heard of so many young people that are working and so much of their paycheck is going to childcare. It's like, I work to pay for childcare at that point. And that is tough because it's like, what's the point of working? You could give up and maybe find benefits that you don't have to do all that work in, or, it's about finding a better alternative to that childcare situation. So I think those are some of the main barriers that at least I personally have been seeing, and I'm sure y'all have seen additional ones, but I think those stick out to be the most around that.
Thanks. What are some ways that you and perhaps other service providers are either addressing these barriers or assisting kind of youth to advocate for themselves with these barriers?
Yeah. Well, for us, one of the things that we were able to do around trying to address some of these things, like at least around the unstable housing piece, is just getting people as quickly attached to housing as possible. So whether it's going through the coordinated entry system, which we've got a lot of constructive criticism around, and we could talk about that for a long time, but that, helping youth go through that and find immediate stable housing is really critical. We also have our lighthouse apartments, which is great. So for some youth that we're able to house, we can do that in-house. So this housing stability is pretty good. Like I mentioned, those venture cards I think are really clutch. That way, I used to have to like go all the way out and like physically give someone a card, and like we had to do a lot of traveling for that. Now I can just load it from a computer, which is very helpful. Something that I think is really important and is a really good resource. I don't know if you all are aware of the Chicago Jobs Council Workforce Professional Cohort, but I can send a link to that too. But Chicago Jobs Council offers like a training that is 12 months. So it sounds like a lot, but it's really one day a month. It's a full day, and you learn a lot of the workforce tools of how to connect people to employment, like the mainstream labor market. And as like a housing social worker, it was great to jump into that field to see what are these employment workforce folks using that I can just steal and use in my work. So I've got a bunch of those tools that I can share, at least the stuff that I learned from there. But I recommend, if you have the capability to do that, of sending one or two folks over to that training. I think we were able to get, I don't know, we were able to get a discount on the training. It can be fairly expensive, but I'd say it's worth it for a lot of the tools that you build and a lot of the connections, because we have so many connections from people that we have met that I was able to meet through that training that we still use to this day. So there's a lot of really good factors, I think, in checking that out. Some of the other ways to address some of the barriers for youth and getting them connected to employment, I think, is around using some of those labor tools that I mentioned. There's one called the BLS Occupational Outlook Handbook, which I think is useful. I'll send that to afterward. But that's great because it really will map out specific skills and training that you need for different types of jobs. And it is robust. I mean, it's the labor department, so they track every job in this country. And they can really drill down to if youth are thinking of different jobs they might want to do. Like, let's say they want to be a pilot, right? You can sort of break down, give them a roadmap of how to get there. And it'll show what skills you need to do, what sort of accreditations and certificates and all that sort of stuff. That's been helpful to help you like map out that process. There's also a lot of the workforce centers will use what's called ONET. I use that too. It's a free website. But on there, you can sort of search jobs for youth based on like interest and on their skills. But it also has what I think is super useful is a future outlook function. So like, let's say you look up like plumber and it'll show you like plumbers in Chicago, here's what they're making. It also, based on labor statistics, they'll predict how likely that job is to expand in the future. So you can help youth connect to sectors that are growing versus ones that are shrinking. And that's been helpful for me, like peace of mind, knowing that I'm not helping someone connect to a profession that's dying off. And they're gonna spend a lot of time learning a skill that might not be useful or high paid in the future. So that's a cool website, ONET. I'll link that also. And then I think another skill to address some barriers, especially for youth who are like, maybe don't have a full grasp on what they might want to do. Like they know they want to make money. They're like, I just need to keep the lights on. What do I do? Something that I find that's useful is helping them map out what their interests are. It's really like the heart of motivation interviewing, but there's a tool called the My Next Move. It's also a labor tool and it's a short survey. It's like 15 minutes, but it gives you a readout at the end of like 6 different vertices that you are interested in. And it's all based, the questions are like, I like to do this, I like to do that. And so you can figure out if you're more into artistic things, then maybe, that's a job you can lean into. And then it lists professions and skills and trades you can focus on that way. Versus maybe you want to do manual labor and construction, and they show those sorts of things. So for youth that are just sort of wide open and are like, I'm open to anything that gives me a paycheck, I think we're better served by being like, well, what do you want to do? And then connecting them to those things. So that's been super helpful. I've used that a bunch. So I'll link those 3 things. I'll send this to you, Brittany, so you can share them. But I think those are the main sort of ways we've been helping, is like using those tools that we picked up and the skills of how the workforce system is operating and connecting youth to employment. And then some of our in-house ways of overcoming those barriers. I think we're using those too.
Those also sound like great tools for adults that still can't figure out, what they want to
Absolutely.
do with their lives. I was just hearing all that and I was like, wow, I wish people would have given me these tools when I was young. Because yeah, it's very cool. I think so many of us spend so much time trying to figure out where to
Exactly.
go in life.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
Yeah. And it may not be like, it's not like a magic prediction thing, right? But it's, I think for some youth that are like really open and don't know, it'll help you narrow in, like, do you want to do creative jobs or do you want to do manual labor? Do you want to do research? Like it can help you get into those ballparks where then you can narrow it in a little closer, as opposed to being like finding yourself, midway through your life being like, I need to change my profession because I'm in the wrong field, So I think it can be helpful in that way of like at least pointing in the right direction.
Awesome. Could you, what's the job market like right now? I know this is kind of a random question, but are youth being employed right now? Is there a lack of open positions? What do things look like?
I mean, I don't know what you guys have seen, but I feel like I've been noticing a lot of youth reporting they've been snagging jobs fairly quickly, especially depending on the sector. Like I know like hotels and hospitality are swinging back huge. Hospital systems are hiring people. So I feel like I've been seeing a swing in the right direction, as opposed to like March of last year when everything was, 16 million people were filing for unemployment. Now I think we're swinging in the other direction, and there's things that are opening up. I was having a conversation. This is actually another thing that I think is super helpful, is forming like a friendship or a connection to any sort of workforce programs that you are close by to. I was speaking with Ray Bentley, who's the executive director for the Greater Chatham Education Workforce Center. It's a one-stop workforce program that happens to be like 2 blocks from our future site. So I've been trying to become best friends with them because I was like, I have so many youth that I'm going to want to send your way. So how do we do that? But he was saying that, and he just said point blank, I've got so many more job orders than people coming in to claim these jobs. So right now he was saying that it's that there are employers looking to staff quickly and there's just not enough people to come in. So I heard that and I was like, this sounds amazing to me. Let's get, every person that wants a job over to people like that. And it sounds like that's a fairly common feeling among other workforce centers and other one-stops. So I would recommend checking in if you have people that are interested in employment and you're not really like knowing where to find those pots of jobs. I would just lean on the workforce system and talk to those one-stops and make a friend and see how many people you can send over there. And I think that at least that's what we're planning on doing. I'm having a call with them after this to figure out how many people I can send over that way. So I always think that's a really good thing. It's just connecting with someone who's already doing the work and you don't have to duplicate services. You can just find someone who does it well and send your folks over that way.
That's great to hear. Hopefully that will continue and not swing back the other direction anytime soon. We typically have a lot of folks, like a lot of our supporters, who always want to know like what they can do kind of in the advocacy realm, or like what they can do from their home, or like where they're invested in their lives. So how can folks advocate for better access to employment for young folks, longevity of employment, or kind of addressing any of the barriers that you spoke of earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple ways to get involved and sort of help overcome and support some of the issues that youth are facing. I think one of the things that traditionally that I've been involved in was the employment task force. I don't know if Night Ministry had anybody on that group, but that was a monthly meeting of housing providers and also workforce providers that would come together once a month and just share resources similar to this. And there'd be one person who'd present, folks would take notes, you'd find out who's doing what, and then you could diversify what you had in your bag of tricks to help folks. So that was super great. That it's the COC is in a weird flux right now where all these affinity groups are popping up. So it's switching from what used to be the task force. Now I think it's called the Income Affinity Group. But I think that would be a way to connect, because I think there's a lot of advocacy opportunities that pop up through that group, and a lot of new issues that will surface, because I think when you see these, like the workforce sector and homeless sector talking, you'll find a lot of these weird areas where things are really not working. And then that's an easy thing to latch onto and say, we're going to try and fix this thing. Like, why don't our data centers talk to each other? Why don't we know who's serving who, So that's something that I think is super important. I think also that Chicago Jobs Council group, that workforce professionals cohort, I think is a really great thing. There's a lot of learning that happens there, but I think you find out you can build these coalitions with other groups that are doing similar and cool stuff. So I think that's really great. But yeah, I think those are some of the main ways that I would think of sort of moving the field and building on the work being done right now to just make things better. I think is those ways.
Awesome, thank you. I want to allow other folks to ask some questions. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or just unmute yourself. And I always like to let folks know this is recorded. We do post it publicly, but I have the ability to edit out anything. So feel free to ask whatever you want, and know that it doesn't have to be public if you don't want it to.
You can also edit out my entire section if you want. That's it.
I have a couple questions. Thanks so much for doing this, Carl. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again.
So my first question, and this is all awesome information. You actually answered most of my questions throughout your presentation, especially regarding like committees or task force that we could be on. I think that would be really useful for us.
Yeah.
Um, and so my first thought is I work a lot with our case managers at the night ministry to help recommend jobs for their clients. And so I kind of find the jobs in the community and send them over. And so they share them with their clients, but I feel like there's a disconnect where they don't always sit down and follow through on applying. I wonder if in your experience you have any advice what might work well, like maybe sitting down with the young people to apply or introducing them to people from the business. It just seems like they don't always get to that part.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think sometimes there's that drop off of like you'll do the legwork to find these employers, and then it doesn't translate to the youth actually getting that employment there. Um, I think one of the things that I noticed when I was doing work in Baltimore was they had a really strong connection to having split roles, basically. So they had one person who was like an employment basically like an employment navigator, but they had two different roles. So there's two people. One person was the external facing. They would go and do the community work, and they would find employers and build those relationships. And there's an internal role that helped people build those basic skills, would do the in-person follow-up, helping them directly apply to those positions and ferry that across. So that's not a possibility for everybody. I know having two people doing that stuff, it's like that's the dream world, just having more staff that do great stuff. But I think, yeah, I mean, the more we can find someone who, because that on the ground work of meeting those employers, that's a lot of work, and maintaining those relationships is a ton of work. And so that in of itself is tough, but then having to then connect the youth to it can be additional, can be tough. I think also there might be ways where you can go with a young person and help them connect. If you do that first meeting, and you can do the handoff in person, that maybe that might be a little bit more of a way to connect the youth to that space if you can go together. I know for a bunch of young people, I hear this all the time, that they're like nervous to do it, and so like I don't know. A lot of people are like, there's a great opportunity, and they're like, yeah, but I just overthought, and I got in my head, and I didn't do it. So I don't know. I've run into that too. Maybe just like going with someone and being like, hey, this is Mark. Mark, this is so and so, and then doing that connection can maybe help that happen. But I think what you mentioned too, just that relationship part is so important, because down the road, I tend to lean on those relationships. Like if you know the employer well, you can stay in contact and find out if there's things you can help improve to make that placement better. You can maybe find out if there's issues and smooth out and put those fires out in advance to keep that youth employed. Just having that open communication with that employer, I think, is it's super important. And I think it also is probably really reassuring for them too, right? That they know that there's, okay, I know Jenny's got this, and like is connected to these youth and is supporting them. So I feel really comfortable hiring on more youth or taking them on. I don't know if that addresses the first point of like getting youth to that space, but like, I think it's tough. Also, I think if you can find, I know I've definitely been guilty of this. Like you'll have someone that's like has a job available, and they're like, I've got this gig. And then you're like, well, I've got this youth who needs a job. They may not love that, but I'm like, it's a great opportunity. And I think you'll find that if youth really are passionate or motivated or interested in the stuff they're doing, they might go after it. But if they're kind of like, it doesn't really sound like something I want to do, they may be a little more to like not go through with those things. So it's tough, because you'll have these jobs sitting in your hand, and you're like, just, it'd be so great if you connect to this, but it might not be what they want to do. And so I don't know if it's like maybe trying to diversify some of the folks that you have connected to connect youth to those sectors that they might be most interested in. But it's just, I don't know, that's a tough thing, helping youth sort of get from point A to point B, and from the idea to the job. Looks like Dre's also in here too. Let's see. Educating folks in the private sector and offering support through the hiring process and issues that arise among employment is so helpful. Then both the employer and the youth candidate employee get additional support. Yeah, exactly. So just, offering that support through that process. And especially, it's so, like, the modern hiring process can be so convoluted. And I don't know if anyone's had to like apply for a job recently, but it's not fun. It's so bad. And, you know, like especially if you sit down with the youth and they're helping them do it online, you know, it's like they'll put in their information and then it's like attach your resume. And then the next page is like, please copy all the information you just sent to me in the resume. And it just kind of feels like busy work. And I think if you could just have a young person, especially if they're like ready to go, just meet the employer, maybe they can like, it might not work with big box stores, but like if you know of a local spot, that might be a good in just to bypass all of that stuff. And like, this person's great, you know, you should check them out.
Great, thank you. No, that's really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks, Dre, too, for that additional point. It's good to have tag teaming.
And then I had another question, and this could be for anyone in the group, if there are particular sectors that you would recommend or encourage young people to look at and discourage young people. Of course, it depends on their interest, and you know, a job could be a good start regardless. But if there's particular companies or types of work that tend to, like you said, have that scheduling issue or aren't as easy to work with young people, it might be helpful to know that kind of off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of I think spots that make it difficult, like for youth to maintain some of their employment. Something that I think has come up recently is around, you know, if people have records, it's really difficult to find employment. And a lot of times we've been doing some strides in the state of Illinois to sort of get past that stuff, but I think employers can really, and it's a lot of the big box stuff, right? If you're going for like a Target or something like that, you're going to see those questions, and those are, it's the smaller like mom and pop spots that you can get by some of those things. But I think the criminal record stuff, the flagging, that stuff, that can be really difficult. So try and avoid that stuff. And, you know, I think also, outside of avoiding, you know, those sort of spots, I think also, you know, now that you know, legal marijuana is in the state, I think a lot of times youth are also partaking in that. I think that can be issues and cause problems with employment opportunities. So, you know, some of those things, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, a job that if you know youth are struggling with those things, trying to find a job that matches where they're at, I think is really difficult. But if you're able to do it, it's super huge. Some of the sectors that I think have been picking up really strongly, like I mentioned, were, you know, hospitality. It is a difficult job, but I think they've been, at least recently, overlooking some of the criminal barrier stuff and pulling people in. Hospitality has been pretty huge. Hospital systems have been pretty big. I've had a lot of people getting into the sterile processing stuff. There's a lot of workforce money towards some of those certificates, but that's a field that I think is maybe going to be a little flooded pretty recently. So I've been having people try and just think of like, well, that sounds great, but are there other things you'd be open to doing? Because there's a lot of people that are trying to do that same certificate to jump into that same field. And it'd be great not to have to compete with them for all the jobs that are out there. So that's, yeah, trying to avoid some of those pitfalls. And also like doing some career exploration. I found personally, if you talk to youth about what they want to do, a lot of times you'll find out that it's like, oh, my friend does this thing, so I want to do that same thing. They work for this company, I want to do the same thing. But is it what they really want to do? And I think that's another question. Like, would you enjoy that work? A lot of times I think youth go with what they can see. If they see someone that's been successful in this thing, they want to follow that pathway, which might be good. If they can get that employment, you know, more power to them. But will it be work that they enjoy? Will they stick with the job? That's a, you know, bigger question. But to your question, I think hospitality, hotels have been really big, and the hospitals too have been hiring a ton of people recently.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point that Dre put out. So yeah, employees that are willing to pay day to day to start is super helpful. There's that gap that is so difficult, that when a youth gets a job versus when they get their first paycheck, that it's like, how do you even pay for the bus to get to your job if you have no income coming in? There is a very tough spot. So some jobs will do day-to-day pay, which is awesome, because then you can have some funds for the next day and roll that over. Yeah, construction and hospitality can be flexible at start. Yeah, some of those. And there actually is a really big hiring event. I know the CTA is doing a really big hiring right now around the red line expansion stuff. I just saw the post go live yesterday, and I can share that too if you guys want the link. But it's basically trying to move a ton of folks that are interested in construction, that maybe have no experience or not part of any of the trades, of connecting to the free training to then be working on the red line expansion. So that's been a big thing, that could be useful. I've got a couple of youth that I'm sending that way. But there are some spots out there, that are definitely picking up and that are hiring as things open up. So it's just keeping an ear out. Anything that I find, I'll definitely share. We do post sometimes on social media if there's like hiring events or job fairs, stuff like that. We'll throw it on social media and let everybody know, because it doesn't do us any good just for us to know. It's like get it out there, let people know about it.
And do you have, sorry, I have a lot of thoughts. This
I
has been
figured
coming
there
up
was
so
more
much lately.
Jenny. That's why I didn't say anything. I was like, I know Jenny has more.
Thank you. Do you have a go-to for childcare? Like maybe an agency or an organization that helps provide affordable services?
Yeah, I think Dre, I don't know if you remember, I know that like Megan and Tanka have been really connected to, I'm blanking on the name, but there's a group that we were connected to, that has been fantastic. I might have to look it up. Illinois Action for Children does have supports for child waivers. There was another group, I'll have to look it up, but there's a group that we've used, and I know Tanka, or one of our youth employees, knows them super well and mentions like all the time. And the fact that I can't remember it is killing me, but they've been really good too. I will look it up. I'll make a note and I'll send that out afterward for sure.
Great. There was one I came across called Chicago Commons, that I'm still trying to like connect with or learn a little bit more about. They have different childcare centers. And then I know the Carol Robertson Center in North Lawndale was one that is pretty easy to work with. But yeah, I really appreciate that, because of course that's a huge barrier for a lot of young people. Absolutely.
And when they can get those waivers, like that's super important, because it is just, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how people do it, but childcare is so expensive and so cost prohibitive that, for a lot of folks, if you weren't already able to make $15 an hour, like that at least softens the blow a little bit, but the prices are still extremely expensive. I don't know how people would do it on $7.25 or $8.50 an hour. But it's so tough. It's so tough.
Hi, y'all. My name is Jesus Del Toro. I'm with Congressman Jesus Trey Garcia, and I'm the local lead on youth engagement. So thank you so much for this discussion.
Yeah.
Carl, with a lot of jobs during the pandemic going remotely for those who were able to, do you see remote work sort of sticking around? And have you been able to help the youth that you work with connect with jobs that have that option to work remotely? And I would imagine that some of the challenges have been, access to, digital access to a laptop and or the internet. So I'm just wondering if youth have had success with, acquiring jobs that would allow, to work from home or work through the internet.
Yeah, that's a super good question. I feel like I haven't had too much luck in the work from home space of helping youth connect to that. A lot of especially depending on where the youth skills are, if they don't really have like an advanced degree or any of the higher level skills that you need, a lot of those jobs that are work from home require some of that stuff. So there's been a little bit of a skills gap between, I think, those work from home jobs and the youth that I've been serving. For the most part, youth are doing the manual labor jobs of like working at Jewel and stocking, that sort of stuff, or getting a job at a restaurant or something like that, where you have to physically be in person. And a lot of those industries are the ones that are coming back. So it's tough. I really haven't found a good resource for working from home. I feel like those are few and far between. I actually have a young person that I recently connected to, and that's solely what he wants to find. And it's very, very, I've been racking my brain for over a week trying to find spots and haven't been successful. So I don't know if anyone has any other tips on that, because I could sure use them, but it's very tough, I think, to find the work from home. And then on top of that, right, with the internet capabilities, you really need to have stable internet for a lot of those jobs. And so if youth don't have that, it's just it's tough to fit into that employment opportunity.
You know, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. Do you know if Lyte Collective has any kind of like social media where young people who participate in the programs talk to each other? I'm wondering if like, even if there was a Facebook group where young people could share jobs and experiences and maybe, you know, good and bad experiences, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah. I mean, those, so job groups are so important. I know that that's like the folks at Kara do that. That's one of their main things. They always talk about their job clubs. They have those morning greeting sessions. People share what's going on. We right now don't have anything in place. I believe when we're open, we're going to have much more of those events for youth to be able to share their experiences and talk about some of the things that they've gone through and some of the pitfalls or some of the best practices. Like they can share that stuff. We don't have that in place currently. I think that's one of the things that we're going to open once our space is available to people. But I do think that they also kind of do that informally. I think I've noticed that too. Like if youth have a good experience with a spot, they'll start to text all their friends like, hey, you got to hit this place up. This is great. Or if they have a negative experience, they're going to let everybody and all social media know right away. So I think for us, it's been a little bit informal up to recently, but it is one of the things that we've got slated to formalize as we open our doors. Yeah, that's what Dre just posted. The beautiful thing is watching youth lift up their peers when one gets a job, they connect their friends. Yeah, it is really like that. It's like, and that's also, I think, sometimes how we find jobs, right? It's like if you have a friend who gets a job and like, hey, this place is hiring, like you might consider it. Like it's the same for the youth that we serve. And if they get a good job at some spot, then they might let all their friends know. And that word of mouth referral is super, super huge. So it pays to keep your friends, maybe they'll have a good job for you.
And I'm sorry, what were those two committees that you mentioned were helpful? I know the COC you said has like an income affinity group.
I believe it's called the Income Affinity Group now. It was formerly called the Employment Task Force. And it was, but I believe that's somewhat dissolved right now. And I think it's now moving into the Income Affinity Group. I'm actually not sure what that is. I'm trying to jump on that now too as the transition happens. But I can connect you and all the folks here if you're interested in joining. I think it's a great resource. But I can send that email out and get on that list. And I think it's still virtual, but the previous sessions were all in person. And that was a really great sort of like, sharing and resource environment.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, it's a full line of action in the COC's plan. That's what Dre just wrote. Yeah, so it's a formalized line of action. The income piece is a central part, and there's an affinity group tied to it. So it's definitely, I think, worth staying connected to that group.
Do you know if that's focused on young people or is it just everybody?
My experience has been, at least in the Employment Task Force, in the previous iteration, it wasn't solely focused on youth, but there were resources that popped up that were specifically relevant to young people. So while it was sort of more of a blanket employment across the board for people in the homeless service sector, there were some things that popped up that I thought were really useful.
Great, and then that could be helpful too for our health outreach team. We work mostly with adults, so
yeah,
it's good to know.
Definitely. And I can send the email of the contact person for that too, if anyone wants to join.
Yeah,
it'd be a good group.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
I guess I could just share kind of a funny contact. I came across this individual when I was doing outreach for the crib in Wicker Park. She actually has her own lawn care company that services the West Side. She owns property on the West Side, and she's employed a couple young people who live in our programs. So if there's young people who live or work on the West Side or are interested in doing that, just let me know because it's very cool. It's very like, I would say kind of grassroots how she created this business, and she really wants young people to be a part of how, she develops the, safety procedures and payroll and kind of engage them in what it means to start up a business. So it's small, it's seasonal, but it could be a cool opportunity. And I know some of our young people have gotten a lot out of it.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, that's a great resource. I mean, even that extra care to like explain and teach some of the behind the scenes stuff, that is, you know, youth are so interested in that sort of thing. They want to know all of the facets of something. And so that's a great, yeah, we'd love to be connected to them. I'm sure if that's a possibility, I'd love to get people connected.
Awesome. Let me follow up with her and see kind of where she's at for the summer. But I
Yeah.
feel like it might be a better fit with like an older young person. She's been working with our high school program, and I think they get a lot out of it for the summer, but I don't really see them as being engaged in the business side of it as much. But like a 20-year-old might be more interested in that. And our young people are getting ready to move out of the program and, you know, go on to college or whatever.
Yeah,
So I would love to connect on that. I'll reach out to her.
definitely. That's awesome.
Also, extra points, Jenny, for that pun with the grassroots and
Yeah.
we all
It was subtle.
appreciated
I
that.
caught it. It was good.
Oh my God, I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, well, you did it. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thanks, Dre. I feel like we would love to continue to work together. Jenny is like our expert outreach and community person, so she has all of the knowledge. But I know particularly my team and strategic partnerships would love to continue to figure out how to work together with y'all.
Yeah, thank you. I just shared my email, and I'm sure I'll have everyone's contact after this. But absolutely, even just little things like sharing who's hiring and, you know, stuff like that, I think that just grows and it helps so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent. Anything else? Anyone? Questions, comments, puns? Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Carl and Dre, for joining us from the Lyte Collective. I think we learned a lot. I feel like we connected well and look forward to continuing to connect in the future. And we will be posting this for folks who weren't able to join us. And hopefully y'all can join us next time for the next LampLight lunch, and be well. And thanks again for coming.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you again for having me. Also, an open invitation to anyone who wants to come check out our space, take a tour, see some of the stuff that I talked about earlier. Would love to have you guys and to just sort of talk more about that.
Do you say your space is not yet open, or are you doing things like that now?
Yeah, it's so close. So we've been working with youth all along. Even the spaces that open, we go to where the young people are and support them in the community. But our space is what they've called the principal construction is done, which is like 95 to 98%. So it's basically done. I'm in the process of getting internet hooked up. So we're like closer than we've ever been before. So yeah, we can do that.
Awesome. I'd love to come see it. That would be great.
Definitely. Cool. We'll do it.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Cool.
Have
Thank you.
a fantastic weekend.
Yeah. Thanks. You guys too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.